Okay, I've got my legal panel with me in studio, criminal defense attorneys David Schnipper and Jasmine Barber. Good morning.
Good morning.
All
Thanks
right.
for having us.
Of course. All right, Jasmine, I'm gonna start with you. Defense, they presented several witnesses from, Skylar Richardson's childhood friends to coworkers, teachers, and of course we just saw Jackson Richardson, her brother, on the stand. And it was the first time we actually saw the defendant emotional. Of course, the state raised objections on the record that this would garner sympathy, and that's something that the jury shouldn't factor into their decision making. Do you think that that scored any points for the defense with the jury?
I believe that the defense, with the witnesses they put up testifying to Skylar's character, were very effective. They humanized her, they made her seem very caring, very affectionate, and especially the testimony from her brother. And when she did get emotional, it seemed at the time when he was talking about her eating disorder and how he would hear her but not want to say anything to upset her. And I think the emotion that came out at that time kind of plays into her people-pleasing demeanor. And so I think the tears and the emotion and the witnesses were very effective.
David, she brings up a really good point, Jasmine, that Jackson talked about the eating disorder his sister suffered from. Let's listen to a clip from a witness named Annie Campbell, who also talked about the disorder.
It was around 6th or 7th grade when we were very close, is when I could kind of see, her not eating certain things because they had too much fat, but then sometimes she would eat a lot of one thing and not want anyone to know about it, kind of thing. But that was around 6th or 7th grade, I think.
All right, David, would it have been smart for the defense to have called an expert to testify about eating disorders from more of a clinical aspect rather than having a few people that knew her to talk about that?
Not necessarily. I mean, as Jasmine pointed out, the defensive strategy is to humanize. And we're supposed to look at this, or the jury's supposed to look at this, as you mentioned, as, there's emotion, evidence. You're supposed to separate it, but we're all human beings,
Exactly.
and that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so having people that really know the defendant and know her well and were there with her daily and know the intricacies of her daily life probably could score more points than an expert who comes in that knows. Some people look at experts as a hired gun, per se, right? Now look, and as Jasmine and I spoke about off camera, you only need one juror to side with the defense, right? So the whole reasonable doubt card, right? And reasonable, there's three things that kind of are under the umbrella of reasonable doubt. It may arise as to the guilt of the defendant from the evidence, a conflict in the evidence, or a lack of evidence. And that is, with all these character witnesses that in the defense is doing very well, that's what that's their goal they're trying to achieve.
All right, well, we've got more dissecting to do from yesterday's testimony while we wait for day 7 of this trial. But coming up, the defense's expert psychologist drops an unexpected bombshell about Skylar Richardson's past. We'll discuss after the break, so stay tuned.
When she was 12 or so, she was having insecurity about her appearance, whether she would be liked, whether she would be accepted, typical behavior. I have taught classes on adolescent psychology, typical. But there's another element to this insecurity about her appearance. She even then was vulnerable to being taken advantage of by someone in authority. So a boy started showing her attention. A boy that Skylar looked up to, who Skylar admired. She began to respond, and then he began to abuse her. He began to abuse her sexually.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. That was Dr. Stuart Bassman, a psychologist called by the defense yesterday, giving shocking testimony that the defendant, Skylar Richardson, told him she was sexually abused when she was 12 years old. Dr. Bassman evaluated Richardson through personal interviews and psychological testing and ultimately diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder, which he says makes her more vulnerable to complying with authority figures such as law enforcement in an interrogation room. Let's look back at some of what Dr. Bassman said about Skylar's diagnosis.
Doctor, have you counseled other individuals who have this trait of being highly suggestible?
Yes, I have.
Many.
Over 1,000.
What is the significance of having this trait of being highly suggestible as it relates to Brooke Schuyler Richardson? If you haven't already told us.
The consequence of this, you cannot stand up for yourself. You cannot deal with confrontation. See, the person with this disorder, again, is terrified of confrontation. They're terrified of being abandoned. They're terrified of being rejected. So they put on a face, they put on a veneer, a demeanor, so you'll like them. So you'll accept them because they're so afraid of being seen as disagreeable. And what happens is they're alone. So even though they can be with people, they're still alone. Last night I did a group at my office made up of women like Schuyler, women who grew up with this particular problem. And in the group as well are men who have exploited women like this. And my goal is to bring these people together so that the women can learn how to stand up for themselves and that the men will learn how to be compassionate, understanding.
Is there something in your evaluation and coming to your opinion, is there something in her past that contributed to this personality disorder?
Yes.
What is it?
First of all, the latest research indicates that there is a biological predisposition towards having certain personality types. There's also research that indicates the way that one is raised. But we focus on the psychological. We focus on what experiences have someone had in the course of their life. Schuyler shared with me that at the age of 12,
Jackson, Your Honor.
Overruled.
may I continue, Your Honor? Schuyler shared with me when she was 12 or so, she was having insecurity about her appearance, whether she would be liked, whether she would be accepted, typical behavior. I have taught classes on adolescent psychology, typical. But there's another element to this insecurity about her appearance. She, even then, was vulnerable to being taken advantage of by someone in authority. So a boy started showing her attention. A boy that Schuyler looked up to, who Schuyler admired. She began to respond, and then he began to abuse her. He began to abuse her sexually.
On cross-examination, prosecutor Julie Kraft took her time walking the doctor through a long list of factors and physically checking each box for the jury to see as she addressed every item. The list included things like concealing a pregnancy, lacking a relationship with the child's father, and giving birth alone. Once all the boxes were checked, Kraft brought it all together. Let's listen to this.
Doctor, are you aware that in your field, the killing of a neonate on the day of its birth is defined as neonaticide, and that list right there is the classic characteristics of a young female who engages in that act?
You're asking me if I'm aware of the criteria associated with a mother that kills their neonatal. You're asking me if I'm aware of that.
On the day of birth.
I'm not aware of this.
You're not aware that, are you familiar with Dr. Philip Resnick?
Yes.
And in 1969, over 50 years ago, he did the first study and identified neonaticide as the killing of an infant on the day of birth by a young mother who has no psychotic symptoms or psychosis, no criminal history, no attempted abortion because that would require too much active action on her part. They're passive individuals. no relationship with the father of the child, an inability to reveal the pregnancy to her mother due to concerns of fear or rejection, the things that you talked about in the dependent personality disorder, that the child is an obstacle to the parents, and we'll use goals because you prefer that word, that the child is not wanted, that they deny the pregnancy, and they typically give birth while alone at home with other family members present within the home. You're aware of the study that he's done on that?
I'm not aware of the study that he did.
But
I have heard the name, yes, but I'm not aware of the study.
And that this identification of neonaticide has been around for 50 years. It's been published in many journals. Are you aware of that?
No, but it's interesting you're quoting something that's so dated.
Are you familiar with the American Journal of Psychiatry?
Yes, I am.
In 1970, Resnick published his groundbreaking study of neonaticide. He performed a literature review of documented newborn murders from the mid-18th century until 1968 in 13 different languages, and found that women who killed their newborns were substantively different from women who killed their infants or toddlers. His work has been supported in numerous other international studies that show that women who murder newborns tend to be younger than 25 years old, emotionally immature, unmarried, often living with their parents, unemployed, or attending school. They do not seek prenatal care and are often no longer involved with the baby's father. Infant deaths were associated with lack of prenatal care and non-hospital birthing. So the original study might be old, but they've continued to research it and expound upon it, correct?
That I'm not aware of. I mean, right now you're showing me something from 1970, which is 59 years ago.
My legal panel still with me, criminal defense attorneys David Schnipper and Jasmine Barber. Jasmine, did you find the psychologist credible?
I really did not find him all of that credible. He was trying to be too rigid about his position and making sure that it was supportive of the defense. And I think by not being willing to engage in some of this conversation on the cross-examination, that he lost some credibility points with the jury.
Maybe like concede to certain things. It's okay to actually agree with the prosecutor. David, what were your thoughts?
I agree to a certain extent. It seemed like the prosecution was well prepared, and he, being a defense expert, acted like he was not aware of that, which I would assume in his field that he should have been or should have known about that.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not in his field. But again, I think there's so many other factors to this case where I'm not sure if his testimony is really going to matter all that much.
Okay, let me get your thoughts on Julie Kraft's style of cross-examining this expert, right? She talked about neonaticide, the deliberate act of a parent murdering their own child during the first 24 hours of life. And she was reading literature and quoting stats from studies on this neonaticide, and she went through this checklist and went through all of the actions that Skylar Richardson engaged in, only to bring that together and say, aha, neonaticide, boom, right? She tied it together. What did you think about that? Effective?
I thought it was very effective, the way that she pieced together that cross-examination to prove her ultimate point that Skylar Richardson killed her baby. However, I don't know that the theory, just the theory of neonaticide, is enough to convince the jury that this was, in fact, a neonaticide.
Okay, David, your thoughts? Should she have done something different, maybe?
Well, I mean, I agree with Jasmine. It's almost like a conspiracy theory or like witch doctor, or let's go to Google and see what somebody wrote in a blog or something. I mean, well, I've never heard of it. But again, I mean, look, we have 12 jurors, right? They all have different backgrounds, religious views, upbringings, and you know, the prosecution and the defense's strategy is to get to each juror with their own goals. And I mean, she's very good. I mean, she's good at what
Yeah.
she does, this prosecutor. So, I mean, it was definitely a good move for her by bringing this up. Why not?
Do you think that Jasmine, the jurors are going to put any weight to what he said, given the fact that his evaluation was based on a lot of self-reporting from Skylar herself?
I think it's fine for his testimony to consider her self-reporting, because where else is the information truthfully going to come from? If she doesn't have some kind of extensive medical background where this has been documented, the only way you can get that information is through self-reporting.
Okay, well, was the allegation, I mean, he brought up something that clearly prompted an objection by the state, and that was that she was sexually abused by a young boy at a young age. And of course, the attorneys went to sidebar, and then when they were done, that line of questioning stopped, they moved on, so clearly he couldn't get into it. Do you think that that might have helped the defense? Because it was brought up, you can't necessarily unring that bell, right? The jurors heard it. But again, I don't know if that was documented. This was the first that anybody had heard about some sort of an abuse sexually.
I mean, look, the defense team has done and I've said this from the get-go, they've done a marvelous and outstanding job of making a Brooke Richardson look like a victim, from everything from the way that she's presented, no makeup, the way she's dressed, looks like almost like a lost puppy dog, right? So, look, it's human nature. If a young 12-year-old female is sexually abused, of course the jury's going to have some sympathy towards her.
All right, guys. We actually have live shots from the courtroom. There you see the gallery is packed as usual, and you see the defense attorneys and the defendant sitting there, but the jurors are not inside, and the judge is not on the bench. So we have to take a break. Closing arguments will be in about half an hour from now, so you don't want to go too far. Stay tuned to Court TV Live.
Brooke Skylar Richardson. She was a former cheerleader, and it's just a couple of days after prom.
If members of the community were to find out
that she gave birth,
that was something that simply was not going to be accepted.
Did she kill her own newborn baby, or was the child stillborn before she buried the body in her parents' backyard?
Watching Court TV Live, I'm Yodit Tewolde. As you can see, those are the live shots from court. Folks are trickling in for closing arguments that are going to begin shortly. But yesterday, the defense called their own forensic pathologist, Dr. Mark Levon, who, after reviewing the case of baby Richardson, came to a much different conclusion than the state's psychologist, or pathologist, that is. He read some of his findings for the jury yesterday.
This portion right here, could you read that for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, because this is your opinion?
Yes, sir. After review of the above documentation and examination of the skeletal remains, it is my opinion that 1, the skeletal remains showed no identifiable evidence of thermal injury. 2, the skeletal remains showed no identifiable evidence of violent traumatic injury. Number 3, due to the advanced state of decomposition and lack of soft tissue for examination, there is absolutely no identifiable evidence of live birth. Number 4, because of the lack of identifiable violent injury and the lack of evidence of live birth, it is incorrect to state that this child died of homicidal violence of undetermined etiology.
And when you say it is incorrect to state that this child died of homicidal violence, you're referring to what Dr. Allen testified to here a few days ago, is that correct?
Referring to the opinion in her report.
Now, can you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the basis of your opinion?
The major basis of my opinion is the actual examination of the remains, and it was also based on examination of the documentation that's listed on the report. The reason I my opinion is the cause of death is undetermined is because there is, in my opinion, after examination of the remains, there is no identifiable evidence of any cause of death, let alone any traumatic cause of death. There's no evidence of the child was alive at birth. And the manner of death, in my opinion, is undetermined because there's no evidence of, and mainly it's based on the fact there's no other available portion of the child to examine. We were only able to examine bones. So the child, it's not possible to say that the child died of a natural death. It's not possible to say that the child committed suicide. It's not possible to say that the child died of an accident. In my opinion, it's not possible to say that the child died of the manner of death is homicide. So of the 5 manners of death, if you cannot assign a manner of death, one of the 4 I just mentioned, then the manner of death, in my opinion, must be listed as undetermined. And undetermined doesn't mean that anything was done incorrectly. It just means that there isn't enough information to choose one of the other 4 manners.
Is there evidence that any evidence that the child was born alive?
In my opinion, no.
Dr. Levon, you also, as part of your examination, you were able to review the interrogation tapes and of Skylar Richardson. Is that correct? As part of everything that you looked at. Was that one of the things that you looked at?
There were two videos that I viewed.
Of her interrogation?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
In that second interview, based on your medical knowledge, is it possible to light a baby on fire by putting a lighter to its foot?
Absolutely not.
And doctor, you're also aware that there was no accelerant found at the gravesite?
I am aware of that. That's correct, yes.
All right, my legal panel is still with me. Criminal defense attorneys David Schnipper and Jasmine Barber. I'm being told that right now you're seeing a live shot, and I'm being told that actually there is Skylar Richardson's mother and father. This is the first time we've actually seen her inside the courtroom because she was on the state's witness list and was subjected to the rule which prohibits witnesses who are going to testify from being inside the courtroom talking about the case, etc. And then she wasn't actually called by the state or the defense, and since both sides have rested and closed, she is allowed inside the courtroom. So, all right, moving on to my guest. Okay, so guys, usually cases come down to experts, right? The battle of the experts. You had the state expert pathologist say that the manner of death was undetermined. Then you had her say that the cause of death was homicidal violence of undetermined ideology. She explained it. I still don't understand that. And then you have the defense experts say that the manner was undetermined and that the cause of death was also undetermined. There were some credibility issues when it came to the state's pathologist expert. And in fact, there were other pathologists that were hired by the state that said something contrary to what Susan Brown said. So really confusing. Do you think that the jury will just discount all of it, or is there one expert you think that they are going to rely on most?
I think they will rely on the defense's expert most in this case, especially with the state of the body when it was recovered. There's only bones. And to hear somebody say you cannot determine the manner or the cause of death based on the remains that were found, right. I believe that's going to ring very true with the jury.
What do you think?
I agree with Jasmine. And look, it seems to me that there was some sort of miscommunication, misunderstanding, or maybe even the law enforcement was saying some things they shouldn't about the body, that the remains are burned. And I think from what I gathered that the second anthropologist said that it wasn't burned. And look, let's say both the experts from what you said are kind of even out, right? For me, I think Dr. Andrew in the very beginning, who 10 days before she had the child, when she went in, him and his 20 plus years of delivering babies, 10,000 babies, said that he was sold that she didn't know she was pregnant. I think that's huge. 10 days later, she has the child, wasn't enough time for prenatal care, et cetera. And then Dr. John White comes on the stand and also says that in his medical degree of certainty that he felt that the baby was a stillborn. And look, at the end of the day, with all the bells and whistles added, was the baby a stillborn or was the baby not a stillborn? And that's the $20 million question.
Well, we actually don't know what Skylar Richardson was doing, though, Jasmine, between the time she found out she was pregnant and gave birth, right? We know that she didn't want this baby. So could she have had time to harm the child in a way that she, thought maybe, okay, I could maybe not have this baby survive in the womb. So what he says here, David, is true and it makes sense, but just because the doctor said that this baby was alive and well doesn't necessarily mean that could have been the case 10 days later, right?
Absolutely true. I think that they could insinuate that maybe she did some things that would have harmed her baby while it was in the womb, but also without her coming to testify, without her admitting to it in the police interrogation, I don't know where you get that information other than the state to just argue it in the closing argument.
I think there's a lot of doubt written all over this case. All right, we've got to take a short break, but stay with us because closing arguments are coming up soon. This is Court TV Live. All right, welcome back to Court TV Live. You're looking at live pictures from inside the courtroom in Warren County, Ohio. Closing arguments are set to start at 9 a.m. Central, so let's get back to yesterday's testimony while we wait. The last witness to testify for the defense was Joe Danzer, a videographer who created a virtual tour of the Richardson property. Danzer walked the jury through each room of the house and through the backyard, giving them a better idea of where Skylar Richardson gave birth to her baby and where she buried the remains. Take a look.
I think we're currently standing near the front door. If I turn around 180 degrees, you'll see the entrance of the home, the front door.
Do you have an image right outside, like you're walking into the house?
No, we took images all indoors except for the rear of the house.
Okay, so this is the front door that we're looking at right now?
Yes, it is.
And you can manipulate that just by scrolling or holding down and scrolling?
Yes, you can simply click and drag in the direction that you would like to view.
Okay. Could you take us to the next blue dot would be the next spot where you set up your tripod camera, correct?
That's correct.
Could you take us to that, please? And could you take us into the living room? Okay. Can you turn, do you know where the Richardson, Scott, and Kim's bedroom is?
Yes, it's here.
Are you able to go inside that room? Okay. Can you turn so that we're looking towards the backyard? So that would be the backyard?
That's correct.
Okay. And turn, if you don't mind, staying in the room. You don't need to go to the next blue dot. Can you look back out in the living room from their room? Thank you. Can you walk us from spot to spot and, as if you're going up the stairwell? So that's the front door again? Okay, so now we're at the top of the stairs. Can you, the blue dot in the center of the screen, do you know whose room that is?
I know it's the young man's room.
Oh, can you, okay, so that bedroom B would be Jackson's room, Skylar's brother.
Jackson, that's correct.
The dot on the right, can you just put without going, just put your cursor there, that's Skylar's room.
That's correct.
Can you keep turning without changing your position and show us where the bathroom is? Okay, Okay, and you can click those blue dots and you can be in the bathroom on the virtual tour, is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you walk us into Skylar's room? Okay, so this is Skylar's room as it appeared on the date that you created the virtual tour, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. On here, are you able to show us did you correlate the tour with the actual floor plans of the home?
I did. As per the instructions, there is a few tools on the left-hand side of the screen, and the middle one is the show floor plan.
Okay. Are you able to show us that live? Okay. So how did you get there?
On the left-hand side of the screen, those tools are available for you to turn on the floor plan. You can then close the floor plan with the X, or you can go back to the other floors and see each individual image by choosing the different floors and the exterior of the home at the bottom.
Okay, and this is the floor plan of the Richardson home?
Yes.
Can you do us a favor and go back into the tour and walk us outside of the home?
Sure.
Through the rear. Can you walk us towards the middle of the yard? Do you know approximately how many feet each button or a blue dot is?
We did kind of make an average from here to the tree line, and my best estimate would be roughly between 15 and 20 feet per
dot.
Per walking path. Yep.
And slowly, can you just do a 360, just slow turn here and toward the middle of the yard, just so we can see the surroundings standing in the middle of the yard? So that's the home. There are a couple neighbors' homes to the right, to the left, and more to the left. And then that's the tree line, right?
Yes.
Still with me in the studio is criminal defense attorneys David Schnipper and Jasmine Barber. And as you can see there on the screen, live shots from the courtroom in Ohio, where people are trickling in and waiting for closing arguments that should be starting in a few minutes. I want to go to my guests. Okay, guys. David, you see the virtual tour there. Apparently there was a jury visit request made by the defense that got denied. What do you think the defense was trying to convey to the jury through this virtual tour of the home?
That the home is very large, that when when Skylar gave birth, sorry about that.
It's early, it's early.
I need some more coffee.